Hello and welcome. I'm Maite Moreno Ugartemendía, and this is a new episode of Proyecto Co by Efecto Colibrí, a podcast that explores mindsets and initiatives for positive change. We have honest conversations with social innovators and impact specialists. Our goal is to learn together how to create a more just and sustainable world. Join us in this journey.
We interviewed Nora Murphy Johnson. Nora holds a PhD in Evaluation Studies from the University of Minnesota. She is the president of Inspire to Change and its principal investigator. Nora is best known for her publications such as Connecting Individual and Societal Change, stands for Social Innovation Review, and her newest book, Creative Evaluation and Engagement, The Essentials, co-authored with Rachel Johnson. In this conversation, we reflect together how changemakers' inner well-being influences their work. Also, the most important findings on their research, Wellbeing Inspires Welldoing, co-authored with Jeff Severance-Cancel, researcher at Terra Luna Collaborative. This report was co-created with a group of impact ecosystem key players such as Ashoka, SLN, Impact Hub, Skull Foundation, Particus, and Synergis. Hi Nora, welcome. We are very excited to have you here. Thanks for your time. I know you are quite busy, so I appreciate you sharing knowledge with us.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. So, Nora, you're the co-author of the report Wellbeing Inspires Welldoing, which is, in my opinion, one of the most comprehensive reports we can find on changemakers' well-being. Can you please tell us more about the research you conducted?
Yes, I would love to. So the research that I conducted was part of the Wellbeing Project, and the Wellbeing Project is still going, and it's growing, and they have more research happening. But this research report that you're referring to was the first and foundational research for the Wellbeing Project. So to understand the Wellbeing Project, some change makers from Ashoka really recognized that they and their colleagues were not doing well. And they were wondering, does this phenomena of being a change maker who's not doing well extend beyond us? And so they interviewed 50 leading social change leaders from around the world to say, how are you doing? How is your well-being? And what they found is person after person shared personal struggles and expressed the need for well-being support. So overall, they found that across the globe, the well-being of change makers, it needed something. People were asking for help and support. A lot of them felt like they couldn't do this publicly because at the time, and this was in 2013-ish, it wasn't as acceptable to talk about one's well-being. That was something you did behind the door with a therapist or something like that. But these conversations about needing help and support as a change maker, they happened in private. They weren't happening in public. So the Wellbeing Project was created in 2014 in response to these 50 interviews to say, could we come together and understand what it means to support the inner well-being of change makers, and to ask, or to test the hypothesis, is a healthy relationship with oneself imperative for sustaining this incredible work? So the project it's a co-created project. And at the time that I was involved, it was co-created between Ashoka, the Schwab Foundation, the Skull Foundation, Synergos, and the Fetzer Institute. And the first thing that this project did together was they invested in an 18-month inner development program. And these 18-month inner development programs happened 3 times, each with a group of 20 change makers. So these 20 change makers come from 45 different countries. And over the 18 months, they were gifted the space to say, we want you to come here and learn what it means to take care of your own well-being, to understand what it means to focus on your own inner development. And so over those 18 months, the cohorts, so I'm talking about each of these 3 groups, I'm calling them cohorts. So each cohort would come together for a week in the beginning of that 18 months and do some deep exploration. They would go back home into their work and have the support of small group work with cohort members, with mentors. Each of them had a stipend that they could use to invest in their well-being. They came back in the middle of the project for another week to process what they were learning and to go deeper individually and as a group. Again, they went back home, they did their individual work and their small teamwork and their work with mentors, and then came back at the end of the 18 months for a week to, sort of bring it together and reflect on what all this meant for them and to look ahead and understand where and how they wanted to take this work forward. So the research and evaluation, I put them together, were really woven into this inner development program. So my co-author, Jeff Severance-Gunsel, and I were both embedded in one of these cohorts. So you have these cohort members and you have us, the research team. Each of the lead researchers went through a cohort. And then what we did to learn from them over time was just to keep asking questions like, what does well-being mean to you? What is happening in your life that is supportive of your well-being? What is happening in your life that is a barrier to your well-being? What else do you want to share from us? So we went into the research not with a list of what we thought well-being was. We went into the research saying 60 people from 45 countries might have really different understandings of what well-being is, and they are all important. So we are going to ask people to tell us what well-being means to them. And what we'll do is trust that they are telling us what's most important for us to know. So the research, and I think it's unusual sometimes in research to say we're not going in with a predetermined idea of what we're going to find. Instead, we're going to go in really open to all the possible explanations we hear from people. So over those 3 cohorts of 18 months, we interviewed each person, most people about 4 times, and we had a lot of short surveys and reflections that they shared with us. So we had a lot of data. Also, one of the questions that the Wellbeing Project had was, are these findings only true because these 60 people who signed up for these cohorts are the kind of people who want to be in a cohort, or are other change makers who aren't in the cohort experiencing similar things? So we were going to send out a global survey and say, this is what we're learning from the cohort members of the inner development program. Is this true for you too? And I have to tell you, I tried so hard to write a survey, but I just couldn't do it in a traditional way because, again, I thought, how can we use words that would be interpreted and understood the same way with people all around the globe? Already, by choosing what to ask about and what words to use, I have slanted the findings. So instead, what we did was what you call a Delphi process. And we actually did a series of surveys where first our team would draft something and say, this is what we've learned about supports for well-being. How true is this for you? But then we would say, what did we miss? What words do you use that we didn't use? What concepts do you think about that we didn't ask you about? We would get that data back and we would send them survey part 2 on supports for inner well-being, but in their own words. So part 1 was our words, part 2 was their words. And then we did that over and over again, one for supports, one for barriers, one for what does this look like in your organization, and so on. So those 2 sort of groups of data, one following these 60 entrepreneurs for 18 months, and two, this global survey, are the two sets of data that we use to write that well-being report. It was more than 4 years in the making.
That must be why the report is so detailed and accurate. It took many years and a solid research process. And the definition of well-being you came up with really struck me because it's quite different from the ones we usually find on this topic. You say, well-being is the experience of wholeness and connectedness. It's a continuous journey and it's action-oriented. Can you go deeper into this idea? What do you mean by this, or rather, what did they mean by this?
Yeah, thank you. It's funny. It's not funny, but I am not based in an academic institution, and that's on purpose. And so my colleague, Jeff Severance-Gunsel, the other co-author, and I both feel like data is actually a sacred gift. Data is a piece of someone's story. It's an insight to their experience, and they choose whether to share it with us or not. And so we receive it as a gift, and our hope is that when we share it back with the world, that we've done so with a lot of integrity and care. So yes, those words, while we wrote them, are not our words. So thank you for pointing that out. So, and each of these words is important. So I'm so glad that we can focus on this. Okay, so experience of wholeness, connectedness, continuous journey, and action-oriented. So the first part is wholeness. I'm going to take each of these concepts one by one. What we found in the very beginning is that people started to relate so strongly with their identity as a change maker that they lost connection with their true self. And so their identity became larger and more visible to them than what you might call your inner core or your true self or your inner light. People have a lot of different words. And why did that happen? Why do we as change makers give up parts of ourselves? And so that is part of the exploration. What did I give up? For example, one of the things I discovered as a woman is I am always being told that I'm either too much or not enough. And that's just a classic way to keep women never feeling like we're adequate enough, right? If I'm emotional, I was too much. If I couldn't meet a deadline because I needed to go home and take care of the family, I'm not enough. And so what I find is then I would start to distort myself. I would try to become bigger in some areas and smaller in some areas. And then I wasn't even my own shape anymore. I had broken off pieces. I had hidden them away. People experience trauma. I have a lot of trauma in my life. I hid it in places in my body and then tried to forget about it. So part of well-being is finding all those fragments that we've stored away, often to protect ourselves, and to recognize the ways that we've distorted ourselves to be more like someone else wants us to be. Bring all of that together, right? All of our pieces in our original shape and become whole. Because when we're not whole, we're fragmented, and fragmentation is pain. When we are separate from our identity, when we're separate from ourselves, when we're separate from our truth, we're in pain. And it takes a lot of energy to live in a way that isn't your truth, right? So the first part, wholeness, is about decreasing the pain of fragmentation and distance from yourself, and decreasing the amount of energy you have to spend being you, because you spend less energy when you're in alignment with your true self. Okay, so that's wholeness. Connectedness was really so important because it was clear that we are only healthy in relationship. And we left the word connectedness ambiguous because people had all different kinds of relationships that were critical to their well-being. So we just talked about in wholeness our relationship to ourselves, to our true selves. but also people talked about the relationship to their family members, to their life purpose, to nature, to a spirit world, to God, to their culture. So it wasn't exactly the same set of connections that were important for everyone, but everyone had aspects of their lives that they needed to feel connected to in a healthy way in order to experience well-being. Then there is the continuous journey piece. I think the whole social change sector is tied in so tightly with the philanthropy sector. And these sectors tend to treat problems as things you can solve on a timeline, right? So we get grants and we say, well, you have 2 years to end poverty. You have 1 year to eradicate a virus. And everything is like, if you're good at something, then you can complete it before the end of the timeline. The thing is with well-being is you will never complete it. And to give yourself a deadline, like if I'm not well or whole in 2 years, then I have failed. That's just false thinking. So each of us is on a journey, and that journey is going to take our whole lives, because let's be honest, the human condition is one where we will get hurt physically, emotionally, socially. So while we are healing in the past, we're also dealing with what comes up in the present. And so it doesn't end. And we would just be punishing ourselves if we said, I have to get this done by a certain time, because it's not possible. I guess that's the continuous piece. The journey piece is that each of us has to walk this ourselves. No one can do our inner work for us. No one can make us whole. No one can give us well-being. So each of us has to take our own journey and walk our own path. And there is no right way to do this. The last part, action-oriented, is, I guess I just really wanted to highlight what we say in the report, that even simple concepts like awareness and presence are really action oriented. To choose to be present in a moment and not tune out by having a drink or checking your phone, that's actually very action oriented, even though it might look like you're not doing anything. And so we wanted to sort of flip the idea of what it means to be doing something, because sometimes well-being, which is also, being is an action word, well-being can look like not doing something, but it is just a different kind of action. So yes, meditation and mindfulness and yoga and all of those things that happen, maybe on a discrete timeline, but there's also just the act of showing up for your own well-being journey day after day after day. So put that all together, we need to be whole. We need to be connected. We're going to be doing this for our whole lives. It's our own path, and we just have to keep doing it.
And as you were talking, I was thinking about this new concept of eco-anxiety that changemakers may experience. I mean, the problems we are trying to solve are so huge, pressing, urgent, that we can be overwhelmed. The thing is that we can't solve them alone. We need each other to be well.
No, and that's what we heard. No one is healthy when they are out of connection with the people and concepts that are most important to them.
Yeah, that's right. I always keep in mind this saying of a Zen master: the most important thing is remembering the most important thing. And I would add, don't just remember it, but do it on a daily basis. So what are the research key findings? Can you walk us through the outcomes you found?
So there's always a lot of pressure, again, to think of things in a line, right? Like we're very linear thinkers, at least in Western culture. And if the people listening to this podcast look at the report, they'll see that we actually have a pretty simple diagram that is an infinity symbol. And each quadrant of the infinity symbol has a label. And so it goes from individual to organizational, to sector, and then to society, and back to individual. And again, the work is never done. And what we find is each time you go through the loop, you can either go deeper, or perhaps something new has happened, like the global COVID-19 pandemic, and you just have a new well-being challenge that you need to show up for. So you have to start with this individual level. And what we learned at the individual level is that so often change makers have this identity of being a hero. And I don't mean to say that they think too highly of themselves. What I mean is that they get put on TED Talks, they're given money, they are celebrated, they get awards. And so a lot of the messages in society is not that the idea or the network of people around the idea is what's important, but instead it's that one person, right? So they keep identifying the one person at the top, usually the founder of an organization, and put them in this hero role. Like, isn't this person amazing? Look what they've overcome. Look what they can do. They can do more than your average person. When people keep getting put into this hero role, it can distort their sense of self and diminish their well-being. And I think that what you mentioned before, anxiety, I think a lot of anxiety comes out of this idea that each of us needs to be a hero in our lives, and that if we don't do it, no one else can. That if we don't do it, we have let someone down. That if we don't do it, that we are no longer valuable, right? So what happens when you keep being treated like a hero or the person who has to do it because you're the special one, you start to think that you can't stop. You start to think that if you stop, all these people who are counting on you are going to be failed by you. So the hero myth, we call it a myth, is really harmful, but it's one that the social change sector has used for a long time. What we found is that hero myth distorted an individual's sense of self, diminished their well-being, and that part of the work of the individual is reclaiming their identity, and that this identity is more whole, more true to themselves, or more authentic. It's less defined by work. Instead, it's enriched by their work. And they come to a place where they realize that taking care of themselves is not selfish. So when we started the inner development program that first week, we did no introductions by organization or role. All of the getting to know each other was getting to know one another as people. We didn't even necessarily know what other people did unless we had met them before. And so many of the change makers said, I can't remember the last time I was invited into a space like this and people didn't want to know what I do. They just wanted to know who I am. So the opportunity to show up as who I am and not what I do at work was just really eye-opening for some people. They'd forgotten what that felt like. And so we had to say, guess what? This focusing on your well-being and showing up just as you can still be loved and lovable, even though you're not attaining awards or getting money. You are good enough and you are worth taking care of. And a way to show the people that you love them is to be there for them. And you can't be there for them if you don't take care of yourself. You do not have to prove to anyone that you are the strongest, the smartest, the fastest, right? What the people who love you really want is for you to be whole and healthy. So what happened then when we talked to people who were further along in their well-being journey is they said, I am leading my organizations differently. For one, because I realized that I don't have to be the hero, I'm leading in a more collaborative way. I'm letting other people take the lead because before I might have been afraid that people would see me as not in control or not capable if I shared my leadership. They said, now I realize that I have amazing people around me. I don't always have to be the one in the front. And that actually, when I trust the other people in my sphere, we're more creative, we're more resilient, we're more innovative, we're more trusting. So participation in this inner development program and cultivating one's own well-being allowed people to show up more authentically as themselves at work, let them create the space for other people to be more authentic. It created a space for shared leadership. And they reported, like I said, more trust and more creativity. So what we were starting to see at the time of this work is that the changemakers were bringing their work into the sector and trying to influence the sector to be a sector that was more open to and accepting of a focus on well-being and inner work. So the last part was society, and our research was just at the very beginning of the Wellbeing Project, and so it was premature to think that we would see impacts in society. So we did in the report talk about some things we thought would change, but we didn't have any evidence at that point.
The next question is about the well-being practices. Which ones are popular among changemakers?
The first part that we said is someone just needs to say yes. Yes, I believe this is important. Yes, I believe I'm worth it. Yes, I'm going to make the time to do this. And that first saying of yes is actually a huge important step. Because so often we're like, I'll get to that later. I'll do that later. That's not high on my priority list. So saying, yes, I will commit to this and make time for this is big. And then the next part is once you've said yes, look around. People once they say yes, they start to see new possibilities. So what we say is after you've said yes, try some things out, experience new possibilities in your relationship with yourself and others, the relationship to your work and with change making in general. And so that looks different for different people. If people are saying, I need to start with me and I need to connect with my body, it might be yoga. If it's, I used to have a sense of purpose and I've lost it, I don't know how to get back to it. You might work with a mentor or with a religious figure in your life. Or if you said, I can't even hear my own inner voice anymore, I want to hear it again. Maybe it's going on some sort of silent retreat or guided retreat. So say yes, and then spend time being with yourself to understand what the possibilities are so you can find out what next steps you want to try. You can stop and check in with yourself and saying, even if this doesn't feel good yet, am I moving towards greater inner wholeness? And if yes, then I think that would be a good sign to keep going in that way. And if the answer is no, you didn't fail, congratulate yourself for saying yes, but just explore a different opportunity or possibility. All of this has to happen before we even get to the point where we can think about aligning inner well-being and outer action. But that step is really important because we find that the more aligned people are in their values and their purpose and the way they do their work in the world, the more alignment they have, the more likely they are to experience inner health and well-being.
I completely agree with you, and it's special in each case because it comes from our uniqueness. So apart from being a researcher, you're also the CEO of Inspire to Change, this incredible organization which has a principle called Be and Become. Actually, I can see it on a poster behind you. I guess it's related to well-being. Is that true?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked that. I became obsessed with the idea of being and becoming through this research because one of the teachers that we had in my cohort said, she sort of joked and said, "You all need to go to Doers Anonymous. Like, you don't know how to stop doing. You actually are so obsessed with doing that you do not know how to be." And what I realized in that process is that I thought that doing was the work. What I didn't understand is that just being with myself, just showing up and being causes changes. Like, and we see it in our lives too, the times where we just show up for someone and listen to them. We didn't solve their problems, but we didn't have to. It was just the presence that they needed. So the guiding principles that inspire to change are really reminders for me because I truly believe that if we want to keep walking on these paths towards health and well-being and wholeness, that we have to hold ourselves accountable to something. And so what I hold myself accountable to in part is to not just always focus on the becoming, but to recognize that the being is equally important in my journey. And when I'm working with organizations who are often, like I said before, getting funded to be efficient and to get quickly to an outcome and not waste money or time, that is just a recipe for burnout. And how can they become better and healthier if they don't have time to stop and breathe and reflect? So when I work with people, I say, you and I, we both need to be and become to be our best selves, but so does your whole organization. And and so does your whole strategic plan. And whatever the things are that set the culture of your organization, you need to push back on the pressure to become and keep fighting for that space to just be, because it's equally important.
I'm delighted with this combination of being and becoming. I usually remind myself we are a completed artwork and also a work in progress, meaning we are enough and at the same time we can change if we reflect and take baby steps in certain direction. So at the end of our interviews, we usually ask our guests these questions. What are your favorite practices or habits to take care of your own well-being?
I'll confess, I, I'm still not very good at this. I see myself falling into the same traps. It's the pressure is real, but the one thing that I need to do is I have to sleep. And I think it's that often people get rewarded for not needing a lot of sleep, but I need like 8, 9 hours a night. So if I don't, I try to get a lot of sleep during the week. And if I don't, I don't set alarms on weekend. And if I have to sleep until 1 p.m. to catch up, that's what I do. So making time for sleep. The other part is I love my family. We have kids from 6 months old to 26 years old, and I just make sure that I have enough time to be with my family every day. Um, I I don't work until 9 p.m. We tell our clients we're done at 5. Usually we're done at 4. We're not going to respond to your emails at night. We're not going to get things done first thing in the morning. We're not going to work on the weekends. Like, our family time and our out of work time is just as precious to us, and we protect it. And the last thing I do is I read. I just get so much from reading. So I always have a book or an audiobook um, somewhere in my bag or playing in the background.
All the practices you mentioned are life sustaining for me too. Thank you for sharing. You already answered the first question. The second one is, what is your life purpose? I know that's a big one.
I have two. I have one that's general and one that's very specific. I think my general one is to be a healer. And for a long time, I had trouble understanding how I could support anyone's healing while I was working as an evaluator. And I had a mentor that said, Michael Quinn Patton, who said, evaluation doesn't need to be a job or a profession. Evaluation can be a calling. And I thought, what would evaluation look like if I treated it as my calling? And I said, if it was my calling, it would at times feel sacred, it would be inspiring, and it would be healing. And so I'm trying to live out that life purpose through Inspire to Change. My second life purpose is I just believe every kid deserves a home and deserves to be loved like they are so wanted and so valued. And so in my personal time, I'm a foster parent. And so I love to make homes and family for kids who might not be able to experience that in any other way, because everyone who's born is precious and deserves that.
This is absolutely inspiring, and it reminds me of a song in Spanish that says, "Each life is worth as much as sunshine." That's beautiful. And also, what you just said is a perfect example of our chance to be change makers both inside and outside our workplace. So thank you. Last question, how can people contact you?
Oh, that's a great question. So our organization is called Inspire to Change. You can see even that's about well-being, right? I want to be inspired to change myself. I want to work with people who are inspired to change the world for the better. So the website is www.inspire-to-change.org. And if you find your way to the website, all of my contact information is there.
We highly recommend your work. We invite you all to explore it. Thank you, Nora. Sharing this with you has been touching and enlightening. Thank you very much again.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope you enjoy it as much as we did. You can find all the references of the episode on our website, www.efectocolibrí.com/Proyecto Co. If you like it, rate us with 5 stars, leave us a comment, and share it with your network. This will help us reach more people and make social innovation become the norm. In advance, thank you. If you have questions, feedback, or want to introduce us to a guest for the podcast, you can write directly to us at maitena@efectocolibrí.com. See you next time.